Hello and welcome to your unit on metabolism. This is an incredibly fun and intricate unit. I love going over this part of the course because it is here that we get to learn about how cells interact with their environment to bring in energy and materials needed for chemical processes that are required to sustain life. So finally, we are looking past what the parts that contribute to life are, and now we have the opportunity to learn about how these parts contribute to the processes that go into facilitating life. Let's dive into how cells use and produce energy, allowing life to happen. To set ourselves up for success in this journey, it is important that we first understand the words we are using throughout this discussion. So let's start with the term energy. So what does energy mean? What does it mean to have energy? Well, think about how you feel when you wake up in the morning. If you have lots of energy, that probably means you feel awake, ready to go, and able to do what needs to be done during the day. If you feel you have no or low energy though, maybe because you pulled an all-nighter working on a lab report, then you may not feel like getting out of bed, moving around, or doing the things you need to do. While this definition of energy is an everyday one, not a scientific one, it actually does have a lot in common with the more formal scientific definition of energy, and can give you a helpful way to remember it. Specifically, energy is defined as the ability to do work, which for biological purposes can be thought of as the ability to cause some kind of change. Energy can take many different forms. For instance, we're all familiar with light, heat, and electrical energy. In this unit, we'll look at some types of energy that are particularly important in biological systems, including kinetic energy, meaning the energy of motion, potential energy, energy due to position or structure, and chemical energy, the potential energy of chemical bonds, with a specific emphasis on this last one, chemical energy. One very important thing to note about all forms of energy, though, is that energy is actually never lost. It can be converted from one form to another, but energy is never created nor destroyed. And this brings us to our laws of thermodynamics. It's important that we understand these laws if we want to understand how metabolic processes truly work within living systems. The laws of thermodynamics are important unifying principles of biology. These principles govern the chemical processes, metabolism, in all biological organisms. The first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservation of energy, states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can change from one form to another, but the energy in a closed system remains constant. All biological organisms require energy to survive. In a closed system, such as the universe, this energy is not consumed, but transformed from one form to another. So what do I mean by this? Well, cells, for example, perform a number of important processes, right? These processes require energy. In photosynthesis, for example, the energy is supplied by the sun. And there, light energy is absorbed by cells in plant leaves and converted into chemical energy. The chemical energy is stored in the form of glucose, which is used to form complex carbohydrates necessary to build plant mass. The energy stored in glucose can also be released through cellular respiration. This process allows plant and animal organisms to access the energy stored in carbohydrates, lipids, and other macromolecules through the production of ATP. This energy is needed to perform cell functions such as DNA replication, mitosis, meiosis, cell movement, endocytosis, exocytosis, apoptosis, and on and on and on. So that's the first law. The second law of thermodynamics states that when energy is transferred, there will be less energy available at the end of the transfer process than at the beginning. And this kind of makes sense when we break it down. So let's think about it, okay? So this law states that due to entropy, which is the measure of disorder in a closed system, all of the available energy will not be useful to the organism. Entropy, or disorder, increases as energy is transferred. As with other biological processes, the transfer of energy is not 100% efficient, right? In photosynthesis, for example, not all of the light energy is absorbed by the plant, right? A plant cannot take in all of the sun's energy. Some energy is reflected and some is lost as heat. The loss of energy to the surrounding environment results in an increase of disorder or entropy. Unlike plants and other photosynthetic organisms, animals cannot generate energy directly from sunlight, right? They must consume plants or other animal organisms for their energy. The higher up an organism is on the food chain, the less available energy it receives from its food sources. A lot of this energy is lost during metabolic processes performed by the organism that were eaten. Therefore, much less energy is available for the organisms in higher trophic levels. The lower the available energy, the fewer number of organisms can be supported. This is why there are more producers than consumers in an ecosystem. Living systems require constant energy input to maintain their highly ordered state. Cells, for example, are highly ordered and have low entropy. In the process of maintaining this order, some energy is lost to the surroundings or transformed. So while cells are ordered, the processes performed to maintain that order result in an increase in entropy in the cell's or organism's surroundings. The transfer of energy causes entropy in the universe to increase. All right, so this is our roadmap for the layout of this unit as well as for the rest of our overview discussion today. Lucky for us, we already have touched on this first topic on energy, so now we can progress on to giving a brief overview of metabolism, what it is, and its different forms. Keep in mind that this is just a brief overview. You will do a deeper dive into the details pertaining to each of these topics in this unit after completing this lecture. Sound good? All right, let's get started. Metabolism. In essence, cells are constantly carrying out thousands of chemical reactions needed to keep the cell and your body as a whole alive and healthy. These chemical reactions are often linked together in chains or pathways, and all of the chemical reactions that take place inside of a cell are collectively called the cell's metabolism. Now, there are two types of metabolic pathways. One, we have those that use energy to build molecules, a process we call anabolism, and two, those that produce energy to break down molecules, a process we call catabolism. As examples, two specific metabolic processes that are crucial to life on Earth are photosynthesis, which uses energy to build sugars, and cellular respiration, which breaks down sugars to produce energy. A way I like to keep these types of metabolic pathways straight in my head is for anabolism, I like to think of my friend Anna, who loves to use her energy to crochet sweaters for her friends. She is using energy to synthesize a complex sweater from a simple spool of yarn. Okay, so anabolism. For catabolism, I like to think of cats, right? Cats love taking lovely recently crocheted sweaters and tearing them down into teeny tiny pieces. Now, these processes either use or produce energy. They do not create energy out of nowhere, nor do they destroy energy, right? It's always either used or produced. And the energy that is used in these processes is usually ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. These molecules are essentially the quote-unquote energy currency of the cell. And I like to think of ATP molecules kind of like rechargeable batteries. ATP is basically like a fully charged battery, one that has plenty of energy that can be used to power cellular reactions. The energy from ATP comes from the breaking of the bond between one of the phosphate groups and the rest of the ATP molecule, right? So popping off that one phosphate group, breaking it from ATP now down to ADP. So once that bond is broken and the released energy is used, we are left with a quote-unquote uncharged battery in the form of adenosine diphosphate, right? ADP. Here you can see this chemical process of the formation and breakdown of ATP. This is just one step in a series of many within our two main metabolic pathways that we will look at in this unit, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Speaking of these two processes, let's move on to discussing an overview of photosynthesis followed by cellular respiration. Now, before diving into it, I think it is always important to go over the why behind the order we learn these topics in. Many textbooks start with cellular respiration first and then progress to photosynthesis. However, once you learn about these two processes, you'll quickly see the folly nature of learning in this order. In this course, we make a point to learn in this specific order because, well, it's really hard to learn about energy and metabolism in cells without first knowing what the terms energy and metabolism mean, so our journey starts there. But past that, next, we are going to explore photosynthesis. And the reason it makes sense to learn this process before cellular respiration is because all energy in a system starts with photosynthetic organisms, right? Well, I guess that's sort of true. Technically, all energy in a system starts with the sun, but photosynthetic organisms can take the energy from the sun and convert that light energy into chemical energy. They can then take that chemical energy, along with water and carbon dioxide, and convert it into glucose, or food. Glucose can then be used in cellular respiration to produce chemical energy, ATP, which is a form of energy cells can use for life-requiring processes. So, as you can see, if we want to take a holistic approach to learning about these processes, we should probably start at the beginning with the process of photosynthesis. So, with that, what is photosynthesis? Well, when you hear photosynthesis, I'm sure for many of you, your mind automatically goes to plants. And this is because photosynthesis is usually discussed in relation to plants. But there are also several other types of photosynthetic organisms, such as algae and bacteria. In essence, though, photosynthesis requires three key inputs: light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, and water from the soil to produce glucose, which is used as food for the plant as well as food for other creatures that eat that plant. This process also produces oxygen as a byproduct, which the organism releases into the air. There are two main processes that take place within photosynthesis: the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reactions. The light-dependent reactions take place in the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplasts within cells, and, as the name would imply, they only occur in the presence of sunlight. The sunlight, or light energy, is converted into chemical energy during these reactions. The light-independent reactions take place in the cytoplasm of chloroplasts, an area that is called the stroma, and is a series of biochemical reactions that use the chemical energy from the light reactions to convert carbon dioxide into glucose. The light-independent reactions are sometimes called the Calvin cycle because of the cyclical nature of this process, which you will learn about in much greater detail later in this unit. It's really important, though, right now to note that although the light-independent reactions do not use light as a reactant, and as a result can take place at day or nighttime, these reactions do still require the products of the light-dependent reactions to function. So indirectly, the light-independent reactions are still dependent on light because they need those products from the light-dependent reactions in order for the light-independent reactions to occur. The process of photosynthesis has been around almost as long as life itself and has contributed to countless life cycles since the beginning. So light energy has been converted into chemical energy, which has been used to synthesize glucose. What next? Next, we have our discussion on cellular respiration, a process that has also been around for billions of years but was only discovered within the last 200 years. So, what is cellular respiration? Well, first things first, let's just get one thing straight. Cellular respiration, as the name would imply, occurs within cells. And it is a chemical process by which cells convert energy from food, specifically glucose, into chemical energy. Sometimes because we hear the term respiration in relation to an organism breathing, students get confused and think that cellular respiration and breathing are somehow the same. Please do not make this mistake, okay? These are entirely different processes. Today, we are focusing on what happens within single cells. We're still in the unit where we haven't expanded past our single cell yet. We're just in the single cell. And we're looking at these chemical processes that occur within that cell. Okay, so cellular respiration, very distinct from breathing. Now, there are two main types of respiration: aerobic, meaning with oxygen, and anaerobic, meaning without oxygen. Let's focus on aerobic respiration first. During aerobic cellular respiration, a glucose molecule is gradually broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Along the way, a lot of ATP is also produced, along with some energy lost as heat. There are 4 key stages in aerobic cellular respiration, each with their own series of chemical reaction steps. We'll dive into the details pertaining to each one of these stages throughout this unit, but for now, here's the overview. Stage 1 of aerobic respiration is glycolysis, where glucose enters the cell, and in the cytosol of the cell, through a series of chemical reactions, glucose, a 6-carbon sugar, eventually gets converted or broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvate, pyruvate being a 3-carbon molecule. In these reactions, ATP is made and NAD+ is converted into NADH, which is another molecule that can be used for energy. Stage 2 is pyruvate oxidation, where each pyruvate from glycolysis enters the innermost compartment of the mitochondria, known as the mitochondrial matrix, where pyruvate is converted into a 2-carbon molecule bound to coenzyme A, and this new molecule is known as acetyl-CoA. This process releases carbon dioxide and generates NADH. In stage 3, the Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle, the acetyl-CoA made from pyruvate oxidation combines with a 4-carbon molecule that goes through a cycle of reactions, ultimately regenerating the 4-carbon starting molecule, hence the name cycle. From this process, ATP, NADH, and FADH2 are produced, and carbon dioxide is released. Lastly, we have the electron transport chain. Through a process called oxidative phosphorylation, the NADH and FADH2 made in the other steps deposit their electrons in the electron transport chain, turning these back into their empty forms of NADH plus and FAD, respectively. As electrons move down the electron transport chain, energy is released, and that energy is then used to pump protons out of the mitochondrial matrix, forming a proton gradient. Right? Remembering that gradient means there's an uneven amount of something on one side versus the other. We have now a proton gradient. Protons flow back into the matrix through an enzyme called ATP synthase, which then makes ATP. At the end of the electron transport chain, oxygen accepts electrons and takes up protons to form water. So those are our main stages in aerobic respiration. Now, glycolysis can actually take place without oxygen being present. It does not require oxygen, and therefore it can contribute to anaerobic respiration. When animal cells, such as in human cells, are exposed to anaerobic conditions, such as what happens to a muscle cell when it exercises too long and uses up all of its oxygen, glucose is converted into lactic acid or lactate via an anaerobic process called lactic acid fermentation. Now, there are several types of fermentation that we will touch on later, but for now, let's just keep in mind lactic acid fermentation, okay? These last 3 processes in cellular respiration, though, all require oxygen, making them aerobic processes. Although only oxidative phosphorylation uses oxygen directly, the other 2 stages cannot run without oxidative phosphorylation, and therefore indirectly also require oxygen. So we've touched on our 2 main metabolic processes in this unit. Let's go ahead and tie these together and look at the relationship between these 2 processes. So exploring how this all comes together, we start with the sun. The chloroplast within a photosynthetic cell then takes in the sun's light energy, as well as water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air, and uses these reactants in the process of photosynthesis to produce glucose. That cell can then use the produced glucose to fuel cellular respiration to produce energy, as well as water and carbon dioxide. Those products can then be used to fuel photosynthesis again, along with light energy from the sun. Keep in mind that the carbon dioxide and the water used in photosynthesis can come from the products of cellular respiration, but carbon dioxide can also just come from the air, and the water can also just come from the soil, all right? Now, this shows the relationship of photosynthesis and cellular respiration within the same organism. But the connections between these processes goes beyond just this, so let's zoom out just a bit more. From here, we can see that other organisms can eat the photosynthetic organisms that has glucose in it, glucose which was produced through photosynthesis. The organism that eats the plant, in this example the rabbit, can then use the glucose to carry out cellular respiration within their cells to produce energy for themselves, which can then be used for various life processes. So that concludes our brief overview on our unit on metabolism. Like I said before, this is an incredibly fun and intricate unit. I hope you enjoy this part of the course as much as I do, because it is here that we have the opportunity to learn about how cells interact with their environment to bring in energy and materials needed for chemical processes that are required to sustain life. So we are now exploring that next part, that next journey in our exploration and understanding of life, bringing together things that we've learned to understand how the parts of the cell now contribute to how life processes are sustained. Have fun!